I'm Elizabeth Meningafong. I mean, I was really lucky, 15 years ago at their 25th anniversary, to be able to be in Bhopal, India, and supporting, on the ground with different actions that they were doing, like demanding justice and remediation of the chemical factory, which is still, in the land there in Bhopal and seeping into the ground. There's been no remediation. The water's still contaminated. The air is still contaminated. The land is still contaminated. And people are suffering. And so I was they're supporting at a medical clinic that offers support to victims and survivors of the gas disaster, as well as their descendants who are also impacted.
Is there still pollution there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's terrible. Yeah, and even before the gas disaster itself happened, just having the chemical factory there, there was chemical leaching into the groundwater. It was the cows actually that were dying before any of the humans did, because they were feeding off the land and drinking the water as well. But there's been no remediation of the factory. Yeah, and so then when I was asked to help make a design for the 40th anniversary this year, obviously I wanted to support and just work with the folks on the ground there to help depict an image that showed the folks who are leading the movement for justice, who are mostly women, and fighting for corporate international accountability, environmental justice. They're really just incredibly admirable in the work that they're doing. So.
And the role of Dow Chemical, they took over Union Carbide. Are they taking any responsibility for the fact that people are still suffering?
Yeah, definitely not. No, I mean, I don't know if you saw the Yes Men parody of Dow Chemical executives who were accepting responsibility for the disaster 20 years ago, and their stocks dropped so far that day. I think they're doing everything they can to claim the benefits of taking on Union Carbide as a subsidiary organization, but none of the accountability. It's been really hard to bring them to court or claim anybody responsible for this because of the just international kind of ping-ponging responsibility. And they absolutely are completely responsible and need to remediate the site that is theirs.
And the Indian government, what role have they played?
I don't know as much about the role that the Indian government has played, but unfortunately I don't think they've been supportive either, or asking demanding that the United States support the people in India, or holding Dow Chemical accountable either.
And there are a lot of sites in the United States. I know there was a tour of survivors of Bhopal throughout the United States. They went to East Palestine. They were actually connecting with people who have similar catastrophic situations, environmental situations. What is the connection between Bhopal and America and the people in America?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's Superfund sites all over the country, all over the world, and I think, in so many places, I'm not sure everywhere that they went on their tour, but, it really is a universal suffering that we're all experiencing, and whether or not it's, a factory that needs to be remediated in our neighborhoods or, somewhere close by, everybody's affected. The water is impacted, and that's a global issue. The air is impacted, the earth is impacted, and, absolutely nobody should have to go through these things. And it's always poor folks, in India, it's where the Union Carbide factory is, it's mostly lower caste Hindus and Muslims who are living there. And so you can see similar things in the United States where it's black and brown folks who are, having to, bear the brunt of these environmental disasters every day.
And the cancer epidemic you have in this country, is that related to chemicals and toxins in the environment?
I mean, I don't know that much about public health, so I can't really say, but, it would make sense. It tracks.
You live near an oil refinery, you're more likely.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, in common sense, yeah.
So what are you asking people here to do? You designed the mural, and people are going to be speaking out. What should American people do about the lessons of Bhopal 40 years after?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's a demand to Dow Chemical to remediate the site. Dow has to clean up Bhopal Chemical now, or Bhopal and Union Carbide now, because they're responsible for this ongoing suffering that's happening, and folks, it impacts the crops that people are growing. It impacts the healthcare that people need, and so I think that's the first and foremost demand. is remediation, and then, definitely greater corporate accountability internationally, because, if companies can just like pick up and move to another country for their operations where they don't have to have like the same safety regulations or like oversight, that's what led to this disaster, the world's worst industrial disaster that we've ever seen.
And profiteering, does that have something to do with it? They want to make more profits and not really have the proper maintenance. I know at Bhopal there were workers who spoke up about the lack of proper health and safety and maintenance.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just like water leaking into the methyl isocyanate, that caused the reaction for this like chemical disaster that killed 20,000 people overnight. I believe in safety regulations. I think that we should definitely those should be first and foremost, and part of corporate accountability and responsibility.
Are you concerned now about the government, the Trump government, who really believe in deregulation and EPA and getting rid of all kinds of agencies which supposed to do oversight, protect people?
Oh yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, it's like, essentially government's not going to believe in like science or education or health or anything like any of these things anymore. It's really, really terrifying.
Thank you so much for being here for Bhopal. My name is Vivek Kimbayan. I'm an organizer with Asata and Hindus for Human Rights. I want to start our program today with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the stolen lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who have stewarded these lands for generations. As we gather here, we as a community must confront our role as settlers and to fight for the restoration of this land back to its indigenous people. As we must do our part in the heart of empire to fight for the liberation of all people, fighting against settler colonialism from here to Palestine to beyond. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming together today in solidarity to mark the 40th anniversary of the Bhopal gas tragedy, which took place on December 3rd, 1984. The 40th anniversary is coming up on Tuesday, December 3rd. So 10 years ago, a 20-year-old Safreen Khan, whose parents survived the gas leak, spoke with deep frustration. People have run out of patience. They still cry and mourn for their loved ones who died that day. They feel that after all these years, at least now, the government and the company must listen and take action. 30 years is too long to wait for justice. Now, 40 years have passed, and the fight for justice continues, with some hard-won victories, though they remain few and far between. On that fateful night of December 3rd, 1984, while the city of Bhopal slept, 27 tons of methyl isocyanate, MIC, a chemical 500 times more toxic than hydrogen cyanide, leaked from a pesticide plant, majority owned by Union Carbide Corporation, a US multinational now owned by Dow Chemical. The resulting gas cloud, which covered 16 square miles of the city, was most lethal in the slums south of the factory, where the poorest residents lived. Tragically, no warning was given. As people scrambled to escape, the gas cloud, heavier than the air, settled over the city, causing intense irritation to eyes, nostrils, and mouths. Thousands of people died agonizing deaths, suffocating as their lungs collapsed. Dr. D.K. Satpathy, a pathologist, recalled rushing to the hospital that night. I saw thousands of people lying there. Some were wailing, some were gasping, some were crying. MIC infiltrated the bloodstream of those who inhaled it, causing horrific damage to their eyes, lungs, brain, immune systems, reproductive systems, musculoskeletal systems, and mental health. Within the first 3 days, 8,000 people were killed. Over 22,000 people have died over the years due to exposure to MIC. This disaster, rooted in corporate negligence and greed, could have been avoided. Union Carbide's plant was built with inferior materials and lacked the safety measures present at their US plant in Institute, West Virginia, to save the company $8 million. The result? Thousands of lives were sacrificed for profit. The aftermath of the disaster reveals the true cost of corporate irresponsibility. Union Carbide used political influence, including that of Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State then, to negotiate a settlement with the Indian government, which accepted just for $70 million in 1989, less than 43% per share for Union Carbide. Survivors received a paltry compensation of just $500 for personal injury claims and $2,000 for each death. The company's chairman, Warren Anderson, personally approved the unsafe design of the Bhopal plant. But despite being arrested in India just days after the disaster, he was granted bail within 3 hours. And he absconded to the US and never faced justice. He retired in 1986 and lived out his days in the US and died unpunished in 2014. To this day, none of the 8 executives from Union Carbide's Indian subsidiary have spent any time in prison. Union Carbide's Asian subsidiary deregistered itself and split into 2 companies to evade criminal liability. For years, they ignored summons from Indian courts. But after decades of evasion, in October 2023, Dow Chemical, which now owns Union Carbide, sent a representative to a Bhopal court. However, they continue to deny responsibility, claiming that the court has no jurisdiction and refusing to pay for the necessary cleanup. The legacy of Bhopal endures. More than 500,000 people remain severely impacted by the disaster, living with chronic health issues, birth defects across 3 generations, and ongoing environmental contamination. Groundwater in the surrounding areas remain polluted by toxic chemicals, pesticides, and heavy metals, which continue to harm people's health and disrupt their livelihoods. The Supreme Court of India has noted that 100,000 residents across 48 communities near the factory are affected by this contamination. The death rate in Bhopal is still 26% higher than the national average. More than 150,000 people continue to battle chronic diseases caused by their exposure to the gas in 1984. Rates of cancer, tuberculosis, kidney failure, and other fatal diseases are much higher among survivors. Thousands of children born to gas-exposed parents or parents exposed to contaminated groundwater suffer from birth defects and developmental disorders at higher rates than unaffected population. For over 4 decades, survivor-led organizations like International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal, the Bhopal Medical Appeal, and the Bhopal Group for Information and Action have been at the forefront for the fight for justice. These organizations, largely led by women from the poorest and most affected communities, have tirelessly fought for proper health care, economic rehabilitation, and safe living conditions. They have organized rallies, protests, and filed legal petitions demanding the justice that is long overdue. Some of their hard-won victories include the revocation of Union Carbide's criminal immunity, the successful assertion of survivors' right to health care, the provision of clean drinking water to thousands of families living near contaminated sites. Survivors have also pressured the Indian government to seek the extradition of Union Carbide's former CEO, Warren Anderson, and have made it more difficult for Dow Chemical to expand its operations in India. International solidarity has been vital to this ongoing struggle. The International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal, which unites organizations around the world, has been instrumental in keeping global attention on the issue of corporate accountability and the fight for justice. On December 3rd, 2024, we will mark the 40th anniversary of the Bhopal gas disaster, the world's worst corporate crime. Over these 4 decades, countless communities have been victimized by corporations that put profit over people's lives. This anniversary is a call to action for all of us. Whether we are survivors of corporate crime, students, activists, or concerned citizens, to demand justice for Bhopal and to fight against environmental and corporate injustice in our own communities. We urge you to support the demands of Bhopal survivors and call on your elected officials to pass a resolution recognizing the 40th anniversary of the disaster. We must demand that they acknowledge the survivors' demands and designate December 3rd as Chemical Disaster Awareness Day. Most importantly, let us link the struggle for justice in Bhopal to the struggles happening in our own communities. Together, we must ensure that corporate crimes do not go unpunished and that no more lives are sacrificed for corporate profit. Thank you for standing in solidarity with survivors of Bhopal. Your presence here today is a crucial step in the ongoing fight for justice and accountability. Let's continue to stand together and make sure that the Bhopal tragedy is never forgotten and never repeated. Thank you.
They know that if they are not held to account, as they have not been for the past 40 years, they can continue poisoning our communities in Bhopal and around the world. I want to introduce our next speaker. Steve Zeltzer is a labor journalist who produces Work Week and is with Pacifica's Capitalism, Race, and Democracy. He is a member of the Pacifica Media Workers Guild, CWA, and also is with the United Front Committee for a Labor Party. He has also covered the struggle of residents at Hunters Point and Treasure Island, right here, who have been contaminated by radiation, and is with the Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers Committee, which is fighting for health care and funds to move out of their contaminated home through the institution of the Stafford Act by the President. Steve is going to really bring home how important it is for us to be in solidarity because it affects our health and safety. Steve.
Thank you, Vivek, and I'm happy to be here in solidarity with the people of Bhopal. And actually, I was involved 40 years ago, at that time protesting the role of Union Carbide, which was responsible for those crimes of poisoning and killing thousands and thousands of people. Unfortunately, as we all know, what happened in Bhopal is not unique because there are environmental disasters, catastrophes happening all over the world because of these companies that don't want to spend money on health and safety and proper maintenance. In fact, at Bhopal, the workers at Bhopal were complaining and protesting and trying to get the word out that the environmental dangers, the lack of safety and health at that plant would cause such an accident. And they were right. They confirmed what was going on. And of course, that's why companies like Union Carbide and Dow don't want unions, because if you have a union, you're more likely to be able to protest and raise the issue of health and safety. So what we have to say today is, what is Bhopal and how is it connected to what's going on in the United States today? Well, I have covered as Work Week and as a labor journalist the struggle in San Francisco at Hunters Point Shipyard and Treasure Island. These were actually radioactive nuclear sites that were used after the war. They brought contaminated ships from nuclear blast to Hunters Point in San Francisco, and they sandblasted them, the radioactive material. Many, many workers got cancer from that. And also, they had an animal testing laboratory at Hunters Point where they tested animals, and they actually tested the workers there, unbeknownst to them, about the dangers of radioactive material. The same thing happened at Treasure Island. Treasure Island was a naval training facility for nuclear war. And sailors they had a ship called the Pandemonium. And that ship was used with real nuclear material what to do in a nuclear war. And we know that those workers, those sailors, a lot of them are contaminated, and also their families were contaminated who lived on Treasure Island. So there's been a long time struggle, and as most of you know, a large number of the community in Hunters Point was black, is poor. And this community has been affected for decades by cancer, by contamination, asthma, and all kinds of diseases. And the role of San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi, the politicians, Dianne Feinstein, Gavin Newsom, has been to cover it up, including past Mayor London, or present Mayor London Breed, who's leaving. They refused for the health department to do a survey of the people who had been contaminated. They wouldn't actually survey the people in the community to see what health effects they have. Dr. Sumshai and others, Ray Tompkins, have been doing investigations. They found isotopes, radioactive isotopes, plutonium isotopes in the residents. And they're also a University of California animal facility there, and those workers have been contaminated. There was a police training facility, and the police were contaminated and got cancer. Their shoes were melted, actually, by being on this contaminated site. So what happened at Hunters Point? What happened was they saw a possibility of profit by building condos on this site because it has a beautiful view of the bay. So they brought in a company to bring in condos, and they built condos and didn't tell people that they were contaminated. This is a crime of capitalism, really. This is a crime of profiting from an environmental disaster and poisoning people for money, and that's really what's going on. I'm also involved in East Palestine, and actually the people of the delegation that visited here a couple of months ago went to East Palestine and met with people in East Palestine. East Palestine is another casebook example of what happens with contamination in this country, because the Norfolk Southern Railroad, which was carrying vinyl chloride, refused to do proper health and maintenance on the trains. And as a result of that, the train wheels caught on fire, and it ended up in a derailment in East Palestine. That derailment poisoned people, and they wanted to get the railroad working quickly, so they ignited that material, and it created a plume that went all over the region, not just East Palestine, but all over the region, poisoning people. The people of East Palestine were told by the EPA, that vinyl chloride, don't worry about it, you can go back to your homes. This is what happened in East Palestine. These people went back to their homes, and they got sick and contaminated. They got cancer, they had heart problems, and also they were unable to work, and they lost their health care. So these workers were contaminated, their families were contaminated. It's a working class community. They lost their health care, and they are stuck in their homes. So I am part of a committee called Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers that are demanding that President Wally Zinn declare this a mass casualty incident site under the Stafford Act, so these residents and workers can get health care and can also get money to move out of their homes. And when Biden came, first Trump came and said he supported them, but when Biden came, he offered more money to grants to investigate the causes of illness. Now, why wouldn't you give that money to the people of East Palestine? There's also a proposed settlement that the government is supporting that would actually not include health care and money to move out of their homes. So here we have in the United States two examples, Hunters Point and Treasure Island in East Palestine, that face an environmental catastrophe. And the workers, the people in the community, the families are continue to be contaminated as they are in Bhopal. It's a system problem. So we have to unite all the communities in the United States, all the communities around the world who face similar things, and demand justice, demand compensation, demand health care. And unfortunately, as we all know, the government of India, like the government of the United States, Democrat or Republican, are controlled by these multinationals. These multinationals are in it for one thing, and that's to make profit, even if it kills people and families around the world. There are many contaminated sites in the United States where people get cancer, families are destroyed because of that. And we have to unite those communities. We have to fight for working people, for the communities to stand up together united in demanding justice. So we say today, on the 40th anniversary of Bhopal, that the people, the communities of Bhopal deserve justice, they deserve health care, they deserve compensation, and also those officials and government officials and company officials who are involved in covering this up should be criminally prosecuted. The same in Hunters Point, Shipyard, and Treasure Island, and the same in East Palestine. Solidarity and justice for the people of Bhopal. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Earlier today, we were playing some music from artists from Bhopal. And I want to tell you a little bit about one of them. And we'll play some of her music after. Shakila Bano Bhopali is widely acknowledged as the first woman Qawwal of India. Her Qawwali was widely popular among the class of aristocrats and connoisseurs, as well as the common man on the street. A legendary singer and actor, she was born in 1942 in Bhopal, a town that since 1956 has been capital of Madhya Pradesh. She is known for her acting in Jagir, Tarzan, Bachandraka. She lost her voice in the Bhopal disaster in 1984, and she died on December 16, 2002 at St. George Hospital after having a massive heart attack. And although she lost her voice in that disaster, we are going to hear her voice, which lives on decades later and will continue to in the future by playing some of her music. Thank you. The International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal has 5 demands. And in solidarity with them, I'm going to read those demands. These are the demands of the survivors of the Union Carbide disaster and those poisoned by Dow Chemical in Bhopal on the 40th anniversary of the disaster. Demand 1 is for criminal justice. The central and state governments in India must ensure that prosecution, Central Bureau of Investigation, seeks the harshest measures against Dow Chemical USA in the criminal case related to the gas disaster. They must ensure that the prosecution agency sets up a special cell to expedite the criminal proceedings against the Indian subsidiary of Union Carbide and its executives. They must ensure that the CBI goes after Indian companies and PSUs, such as Gas Authority India Limited, ONGC, Indian Oil Corporation, Gujarat Alkalis Chlorides Limited, Tamil Nadu Indian Additives Limited, Madhya Pradesh Vindhya Telelinks Limited, that continues to sell Union Carbide's products even after they were barred from doing so by the CJM in Bhopal. That's the first demand. And I just want to highlight how simple these demands are, and just how this shows just how much, over 40 years, the Indian central government and the government of Madhya Pradesh have just completely ignored their responsibility to their own citizens, the people of Bhopal, by not taking these most basic actions against these multi-million and billion-dollar corporations. The second demand is for compensation. Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, must pay compensation for health damages, including congenital malformations, growth retardation, and immune system damage in the children of gas-exposed parents. Compensation for health damages due to the contamination of soil and groundwater in and around the abandoned Union Carbide factory site, which continues to this day. The central and state governments of India and Madhya Pradesh must sue Union Carbide and Dow Chemical to pay for damages to the children of gas-exposed parents on the basis of hospital records and scientific studies. They must honor the 1991 settlement order of the Supreme Court by making up the shortfall in compensation by paying 5 lakh rupees to each of the over 500,000 gas victims for lifetime injuries. The third demand is for medical care and research. The central and state governments must ensure setting up of the Empowered Commission on Bhopal, approved by the central government in June 2008, with a corpus fund of 1,000 crore rupees for medical, social, economic, and environmental rehabilitation of Bhopal survivors. Scrap the planned merger between AIIMS Bhopal and BMHRC that will be disastrous for the healthcare of survivors. Ensure the implementation of all recommendations of the Supreme Court appointed Monitoring Committee on Medical Rehabilitation of Survivors and their dependents. Ensure free medical care to residents chronically exposed to groundwater contaminated by hazardous waste from the Union Carbide factory. Ensure that the National Institute for Research on Environmental Health, set up in response to demands of survivors' organizations, sticks to its original mandate and resumes research on the long-term health damages caused by exposure to Union Carbide's poisons. The fourth demand is for economic and social rehabilitation. The state government must ensure the immediate utilization of the remaining 129 crore rupees allocated for generation of jobs and pension for the survivors of the disaster and their children lying unutilized for the past 14 years. They must ensure that housing is provided to all residents living in communities affected by groundwater contamination, whose dwellings were demolished in January of 2023 by the district administration. They must ensure that the monthly pension of 1,000 rupees per month paid to women widowed by the gas disaster is increased to 3,000 rupees per month. 530 women officially acknowledged to have been widowed due to the disaster, but wrongfully denied pensions so far, must be included among the beneficiaries. The fifth and final demand is for environmental remediation. Dow Chemical must obey Indian and U.S. laws and clean up the soil and groundwater contaminated due to reckless dumping of hazardous waste by its subsidiary, Union Carbide. Dow Chemical must pay for environmental damages caused by Union Carbide. The Indian government must claim compensation from Dow Chemical for environmental and health damages due to the contamination of soil and groundwater in and around the abandoned Union Carbide factory site. The Indian government must seek the assistance of the United Nations Environmental Program for comprehensive scientific assessment of the contamination of soil and groundwater. The Indian government must scrap the plan of incinerating Union Carbide's 337 megatons of hazardous waste in the Pithampur facility that will only expose a very large population to dangerous chemicals. The state government must scrap the plan of pouring concrete over the contaminated factory site and thus covering up for Dow Chemical. The state government must provide clean, piped drinking water to all communities within 4.5 kilometers from the abandoned Union Carbide site. And the state government must secure the factory premises and the area of the solar evaporation ponds as directed by the Madhya Pradesh High Court. These are the demands of the survivors of the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal as we approach the 40th anniversary of this disaster, which is ongoing. Thank you.